So a few of you may remember before the pandemic, we got a bus tour together. We were so excited. We were going to the Sight and Sound Museum to see Peter. And it took us, 3.5, 4 hours. We got to have one of the giant smorgasbords in Lancaster. And then we went to the Sight and Sound Theater, and we actually got to meet the guy playing Peter. He was the nephew of someone who used to come here, Tara Shaw. And then if you've been to the Sight and Sound Theater, you know it's almost it's not quite 360, but it's like 240 degrees of stuff going on all the time. And Peter is this loud and boisterous and big guy, and he's all of these things happen, and then they go out and they have this encounter with Jesus. And then he says, "Put down your nets," and the special effects are just unbelievable in the theater. And you see they raised up the stage, and suddenly you saw this screen that showed all of the fish flying into the net as the boat's being tossed around, and they're trying to gather the nets in. And all of a sudden something breaks, and the show stops. We saw 18 minutes of that show, and they never got it to go again. So some people went back later. I never saw the rest of the show, but we know the rest of this story. But then every time I read this story, I think of that moment, like, we saw the great catch of fish, and then what? And it sort of left you hanging and wanting more. But this is the story we get to hear the rest of today as we consider the window that we have of Jesus teaching from the boat, and then what happens right after that, of this miraculous catch and a transformation of his disciples, his early disciples, as they leave everything and follow the Lord. In both the passage in Isaiah and in this passage in Luke, we see the same pattern. There's an epiphany. There's an understanding. They see God. They see something miraculous happen, and their first response to that epiphany, the reaction, is hitting the dirt, hitting their faces, saying, "I am not worthy." So we see that epiphany, then we see the reaction, then we see a reassurance. In Isaiah, it's a cleansing, it's a forgiveness, and with Peter and Jesus says, "Do not be afraid." This reassurance that even in the presence of God, God still has something for him. And then the final thing that we see is a commission in both of them. In Isaiah, he says, "Whom shall I send?" And Isaiah says, "Here I am, send me." With Jesus and Peter, Jesus doesn't even give Peter an option. He says, "From now on, you're fishing for people." He doesn't even say, "Are you in with me?" He's like, "Here is what you're going to do." So when we think about that epiphany, the reaction, the reassurance, and the commission, we can think about how that applies in our own lives today and what that means for us, our posture, and also our being sent out into the world, launching out, as we just sang, to be God's presence and God's love for a broken world. So if we think about this scene, a couple of weeks ago I preached about Jesus healing Peter's mother-in-law. He had preached in the synagogue, and then he went home for the Sabbath meal, but the mother-in-law was sick, and he instantly healed her, and she began to serve all of them. So that had just happened, and word had spread. At the end of Luke 4, you see all of these people coming, seeking primarily healing. They wanted to get to know Jesus, but they really, really wanted to see those miracles happen. So there was notoriety already spreading about Jesus. And so now Jesus he's in the Sea of Galilee. Lake of Gennesaret was a Roman way of calling that the Sea of Galilee. So Luke is writing to a Roman audience, and so that's why he uses that term. So he says, Jesus, as he's standing by the lake teaching, it's interesting that Jesus has already moved from the synagogue where he first taught into just the countryside, into the normal places where people were. And this part of the Sea of Galilee, there were a lot of inlets where fishermen could pull up their boats, but they also had fairly steep sides, so they sort of formed a natural amphitheater. So people had gathered around Jesus as he was at the beach, but so many people pressed in, he realized that he'd do much better by getting into a boat and pulling out a little bit so that he could see everybody all around him in that inlet. It's interesting that sound actually carries better on water than it does on ground. So his voice naturally could carry to reach all these people that were gathered. So he stood in this boat and he taught, and you can see by this window, Jesus is teaching a whole different group of people. There are older people and younger people. There's women and men. I love the little child that is seated at the feet maybe of his mother, just playing, but you know that he's absorbing what Jesus has to say. Let the little children come unto me. And as Jesus is teaching that, his hand is out and it's like he's blessing the people that are listening to him. And I want to think that if you notice, it looks like his hand is almost on one specific person. And I wonder if that was Peter, if the artist meant to say that was Jesus blessing Peter, because he is about to blow Peter's mind. So he says, okay, let's go out. Why don't you put out to sea and throw down your nets? And I love Peter. Peter is a what you see is what you get kind of guy. He is not about pretense. He's not about intellect. He's like, here's the deal. So he's like, fine. It's not like we've been out all night long looking for fish, didn't catch anything, but whatever you say. So you hear some sarcasm and a little bit of like, I'll obey, but I want to make it clear. Like, we've tried. We're fishermen. You're a carpenter. You don't really know what you're talking about, but whatever. And he knows. I mean, he's seen Jesus do some miracles already. So there's this element of faith, but there's also skepticism at the same time. And he's not sure what he's going to see here. So he's just being honest with what happens. Well, then they cast down their nets, and all of a sudden, they're just overwhelmed. The net is so heavy, one boat can't fill it, or can't hold it, so they call the other boat up. They both load all of these fish. They fill 2 boats full of fish. Some scholars estimate that was between 12 and 20 years worth of fish in one catch. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of fish in one catch. This wasn't just, that was a good day of fishing. This was something that was absolutely blowing their minds, that were astonished with what they had seen. And this is Jesus who'd healed some individuals, but suddenly he showed Peter and the others gathered that he was not just Lord of people and individuals. He was Lord of the universe. He was Lord of creation, and he was able to even command fish. I mean, what fish obeys an order? But suddenly all of these fish pour into this net. And Jesus blesses these fishermen with this overabundance. I mean, astonishing is the word that gets used. They're astonished by this catch. And what happens is Peter instantly hits the dirt. He realizes that he is in the face of the Lord. He uses the word Lord, and this is the first time in the Gospel of Luke that the word Lord is used by anybody except for people, for like the demons call him Lord. The others, every time Luke uses the word Lord, it is as the narrator saying, this is God, the angel of the Lord, that kind of thing. Now suddenly a human uses the term Lord. It's interesting, one thing I hadn't even noticed until I was reading this over and over, that Simon, he's called Simon every single spot up until verse 8. And then it says, when Simon Peter saw this. When Simon Peter saw this. Jesus gives Simon Peter the name Peter in Luke 6, but this is Luke 5. But it is at seeing this miracle and at comprehending who Jesus is that his being changes. He goes from being normal Simon to being the rock. He's transformed because his eyes are open to see who Jesus really is. This is the moment of epiphany. He suddenly realizes that this guy that he's been hanging out with is far greater than anything he can imagine. Suddenly he's like, I am in the presence of holiness. It's the same as with Isaiah when he sees the Lord high and lifted up and his train fills the temple. And when he sees this, he hits the dirt and says, I am a man of unclean lips from a people of unclean lips. Peter does the exact same thing. He says, Go away from me, Lord. I am a sinful man. He feels completely unworthy in the face of who Jesus is. He's had this vision, and then in looking at the light of God and the holiness of God, it's like Moses standing in front of the burning bush, and God tells him to take his shoes off. Suddenly, Peter realizes how, if he is that light, look at the dirt in me. The light had just gotten turned up, and all of a sudden, all of the dirty corners of Peter's life are exposed. And he realizes this is not a specific sin. He probably wasn't, doing anything extreme in his life, but he realized that compared to God's holiness, he had nothing to offer. And what does Jesus do? He's like, yeah, you're right, get out of here. No. Jesus sees in this broken fisherman, this humble fisherman, the rock on which he is going to build his church. Jesus sees the potential in this guy that nobody else would have seen. Why would you pick just a guy who is a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee to change the world? And yet this is who Jesus grabs onto. So his reaction as he falls down is amazing. N.T. Wright had a great thing written about this. Like he's saying, imagine yourself being in there and imagine what it would be like to suddenly see this giant catch a fish. It says, feel the sense of awe, terror even, as you come determined with the power of Jesus. Then feel that sense of terror increase as he turns to you with what looks like a question in his eyes, though it proves to be a command. You and I are going to be working together from now on, he says, and you realize that you have no choice. If this man is not worth following, no one is. If this man isn't worth following, then no one is. It's just an incredible moment where Peter's whole life is turned around. He hits the dirt, and yet Jesus doesn't let go of him. And it's actually specifically in Peter's confession and his willingness to admit that he's got nothing to offer that qualifies him for ministry. Daryl Bach says, what Peter does not realize is that admitting one's inability and sin is the best prerequisite for service, since then one can depend on God. It is one thing to be a sinner and deny it. It is another to know who you are before God and humbly bow before him. I'm sure none of you feel worthy to be a powerful witness to the Lord. I certainly don't. There are many, many times I'm like, God, are you sure you picked the right person here? But God chooses those who know that they're not enough, because newsflash, none of us are enough. But with Christ, all of us are enough. Jesus plus us is always enough, because Jesus by himself is enough. But he chooses the weak things of the world to confound the strong. He loves to use weak people to be able to show off his power. Thanks be to God. That is the only way we are qualified to serve him. So that instantly there is this reassurance. Again, with this picture, imagine Jesus putting his hand on Peter's head. The face of the man he's almost touching is downcast, is very low. And I can just see Jesus saying, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Who says do not be afraid the most? It's angels. Anytime an angel shows up, everybody is cowering in fear, and the angels always say, do not be afraid. Well, in this instance, Jesus himself is saying those words, do not be afraid. Jesus is with him. That's the reassurance, the assurance that what he is seeing is something new, but it is something that is so powerful and so good and so right and holy. Jesus, as we see through the rest of Luke, we often see Jesus say, do not be afraid, whenever he reveals something new about his character. The transfiguration, and they're like, what is this? But Jesus says, don't be afraid. And over, every time they see something big about God, don't be afraid. That's that reassurance. We've seen the epiphany, we've seen the reaction, and then the reassurance. The reassurance that forgiveness comes from the Lord, that in the Isaiah passage that his mouth gets cleansed. It's kind of a weird scene where the seraphim brings a live coal and uses that to almost cauterize his lips to make him pure and holy again. And then in both the Isaiah passage and here with Peter, there's a commission. There's, here I am, send me, Isaiah says. And here, again, with Peter, he's not given a choice. Jesus just says, from now on, you will be fishers of men. You're going to catch people. It's interesting, there's 3 times in the English translation that the word catch comes. They have this big catch of fish. They let down their nets to catch fish, and then you'll catch people. But in the Greek, it's a different word for catching people than it is for the other 2. It's obviously talking about fishing, but the way that the word that they use for catch at this part is not to catch in order to kill and to eat, but rather to catch alive, to capture alive. So you've caught fish that will lead unto death, but now you're catching people that leads unto life. It's an interesting nuance I had never noticed before, but I just thought that was so interesting that God isn't capturing people to put them in prison. He's capturing them to set them free from the slavery that they've been in. And that's the mission that God is calling Peter into and inviting him to join with him. And instantly, this is an incredible catch of fish, and he also, at the same time, catches disciples. Jesus captures Peter and James and John. Andrew was probably also there. He was James and John's brother. So 4 disciples plus a giant net full of fish. And then they leave everything behind. It's incredible to think they've just had the best success of their entire career, and yet they're willing to walk away from that. I'm somewhat reassured. I always wondered what happened to the families when the disciples just said, I'm out of here. I'm going to go follow this random wandering preacher. And the families are going, what about us? But I kind of feel like this story reassures me that they were taken care of, that this catch of fish probably provided for their families for a really long time. And that makes me feel better about all of that. But it's interesting to think about what God is calling us to do in that same way: epiphany, reaction, reassurance, and commission. Do we get to see God like they did? It is not always easy to see God, especially in our Western world where everything is rational and reasonable, and you turn on a light bulb and the light happens. One thing I love about traveling with my African brothers and sisters is that they have to have a whole lot more faith. Because when things work out, it has to be God. There's a sense that if you don't have a hospital nearby and someone's really sick, the only option you have is to pray for them. And it's amazing to see how many healings happen. In the Western world, we go to the hospital, we do the various things. Where is God? Well, one thing that God has given us is the Word. The Word is his revelation to us. It is where he reveals who he is and what he does and how he works. The Bible also tells us the heavens declare the glory of God. When we have spiritual eyes, Calvin talked about the spectacles of faith, glasses that help give us the ability to see around us. We see the hand of God everywhere we look, whether it is in a sunset or in a child or in a conversation. God is present everywhere we are. And what does that call us to do when we see God, when he reveals himself to us? Our reaction should be humility and submission to say, I am a person of unclean lips from a people of unclean lips. The interesting thing to me about Isaiah's confession is that it's personal and corporate. He's not just saying, I'm a mess, or boy, aren't those people a mess. Boy, isn't it easy to point out the sins of everybody else. But he starts with himself, and he owns the sins of those around him as well. And he cries out to the Lord for mercy. I think that's one of the things that we, especially as American Christians, need to pray about and think about. Every major revival that has ever happened starts with confession. It starts with bowing before the Lord and saying, who am I? One of my favorite revival stories happened in China, and the first people to confess were the Western missionaries who realized how much their pride and control had gotten in the way of sharing the humble gospel of Jesus Christ to the people in their area. They confessed to the leaders of the church, who confessed to the men, who confessed to the women, who then confessed and then received a new call. And they would go out into the countryside, and they were called the Bible ladies, and they would share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, shortly after that revival hit, this is the Shantung province in China, the Japanese invaded and pulled out all of the Western missionaries. And yet the Bible ladies were still free to go around and share Jesus Christ. Confession was what turned that area around, and millions of people became Christians because people were willing to humble themselves and confess. One of the things I love to do is I have several different commentaries and books that I read that help me have a non-American perspective on the Bible, because sometimes people understand that in a different way. And one of my favorites is the Africa Bible Commentary. And this is one of the things it said in terms of our reaction and our need to confess. Our sinfulness as Christians may be seen in the substandard quality of our ministry in the world today, where poverty, gender inequality, a lack of housing, a lack of medical care, and many social ills prevail. We are not called to employment and service in the world for material profit, but primarily in order to please God and to be engaged in the ministry of word and deed that catches people alive and makes life livable, humane, and godly. What a convicting statement. As we confess, as we hear God's call, as these disciples left everything and followed Jesus, are we doing that, following Jesus for our own gain, for our own comfort? Or are we doing it to bless the Lord and bless those around us? God gave us in our commission 2 commandments: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. How are we loving our neighbor? Are we loving our neighbor well? Are we praying for our neighbors? Are we listening to them? Are we treating them as they are created in the image of God? Are we being a community together where healing can happen, where God's presence exists, where people are curious and hungry to know what's going on here? That's our commission. It is not just, we're going to hear from the Kenya mission team in just a minute, and it's not just sending people overseas. It's God has sent you wherever you go every single day, whether it's to the grocery store or to the office or to your family kitchen table. God is sending you to love. God loves us, so we love each other, so that in his love, through his love, we can love those who then want to see who God is as well. Our simple commission is to follow Jesus and invite others along with us to come and see. That is our call, to behold our God, the one who is high and lifted up, to come before him with humility, to seek forgiveness, and to find ourselves commissioned and sent out to not only be followers of Jesus, but catchers of people as well. Let's pray together.